I'm just waiting for more people to come on, and then I will officially start. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third SPR webinar on retail repurposing. And we're focusing on shopping centres and department stores today. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Joanna Turner, and I am the head of property research at Canada Life Asset Management, and I'm also on the SPR committee. So the subject of today's webinar of the challenges and opportunities of repurposing redundant department stores and shopping centres, it couldn't actually be more relevant and topical than it is today. Just this week, we heard the news that the online retailer Boohoo has agreed to purchase Dorothy Perkins, Wallace and Burton, these Arcadia brands, and then ASOS is taking on Topshop, Topman and Debenhams. So this is completing the sell-off of Arcadia's brands. And, just those transactions alone are going to cause a further 17 million square foot of retail space to sort of hit the market surplus to requirements. And obviously, those online retailers are only interested in the online business of those brands, and they're vacating the physical stores. So on top of which, of course, we've got the pandemic and enforced closures of retail, non-essential retail stores throughout this year, which is, sort of exacerbated an existing sort of structural trend. And the main issue, which is the topic of this webinar really, is the fact that department stores and shopping centres by their very nature are less liquid in the investment market, and and also less easy to convert, precisely because of their size, complexity, and the fact that they're out of favour with a lot of investors, etc. But on the other hand, they're situated in prime locations, often prime high street locations, and therefore they represent a major opportunity for both existing owners and also new entrants to transform them and repurpose them into something that's really going to add value in the future and serve a sort of community purpose to reinvigorate our high streets. So I don't want to steal anyone's thunder today. I just thought I'd introduce that topic because personally I find it fascinating. I think we're at a real transition point in the market now where we have to act, we have to do something to save our high streets and to revitalise and save our shopping centres. Otherwise we're just going to face swathes and swathes of retail space that's just not fit for purpose. So that's exactly what our speakers and panelists are going to talk about today. So with that in mind, I have asked our four illustrious speakers here to each speak for about 5 minutes each, quite short, but just to give you and me some sort of insight, some of their key insights to set the scene and hopefully spark an interesting debate in the panel discussion that we're going to have later. So you're all obviously on mute. I think you all know the protocol now, but basically please do feel free to chat in the chat function, and I want to make it as interactive as possible. So we'll look at your questions, and I'll pose those questions to our speakers and analysts. The other thing I want to mention is we'll be sending a survey monkey afterwards, and I really would appreciate it if you could sort of spend a few minutes filling that in, because it helps us plan future webinar events, and we really do take your feedback on board. We discuss it in the committee and definitely think about it when we're planning future events. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our speakers. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves very briefly, and then from that we'll take it forward with James beginning his short presentation. So just looking to the left of my screen, could we start with Patrick? Would you just basically introduce yourself and sort of your interest in the topic, really?
Sure. So I'm Patrick Abrams, the director of Applied Studio, which is an architecture and interior design company. So we're kind of looking at this from obviously a design point of view. We do a whole bunch of different types of work, but primarily within the F&B sector. And obviously a lot of our work concerns high streets and are involved actively in some of the projects that are repurposing these shopping centres.
Perfect, thank you. James, over to you.
Hello everybody, and thanks Joe. Excuse me, I'm James Child, I'm Head of Retail and Industrial Research at EG. For those of you who don't know, EG is the leading news data and analysis platform for commercial real estate. I've worked at EG for 10 years now, unbelievably. With that, I've accrued hopefully some intelligence that I'll share with you today regarding the structural side of retail.
Perfect. Matt, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joanna. Afternoon, everyone. So I lead the research into all different consumer-facing sectors in the real assets division of Legal and General Investment Management. So we're a property owner. We own everything from offices, logistics, build to rent to retail. And within our holdings are 6 shopping centres that are very much locally orientated. So my role is very much focused around investment strategy, supporting the operational management of our schemes, and also leading our retail data function.
Thank you very much, Matt. Tom.
Hi, yes, Tom Whittington from Savills, Director of Retail and Leisure Research. Been doing it for 20 years and probably need repurposing myself, to be honest. But what's been really interesting about this whole agenda is having spent such a long time looking at vacancy rates, and it got to a point where you just start thinking, right, what are we going to do about it? So for the last 3 years, I've been heading up the repurposing research within Savills, and it's producing quite a lot of content and discussion, as you can imagine.
Yes, perhaps you'd like to mention, Tom, that you've got this new Reimagining Retail report, and you know that's getting a lot of press and stuff at the moment, isn't it?
We're normally told to produce very short research reports, but this is 120 pages.
Wow.
And it's a bit unfair to do it to use this as a plug, but savills.com/reimagining retail has all the articles and content, and it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is a fascinating read. I've read quite a few of those articles myself. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Right, so we're going to now make a start. So I'm now going to ask James if you'd like to sort of share your screen and if you'd like to do your talk, please.
Sure, thank you. Right, hopefully this works.
Yeah, I'm going to go on mute.
If you wouldn't mind just saying I can see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so now that's out of the way, hopefully you can hear me as well. As Joe said, I'm kind of here to share some analysis that we've produced in recent months and years, actually looking at the structural side of retail real estate, which I'm hoping is basically going to act as a real starter for 10 for this session and give hopefully a solid platform to the experts on the webinar today to talk about their experiences and some proper examples. Joe, I know we're under a strict time curfew, so if I go over, then please feel free to give me a nod. But I think there are plenty of reasons for concern when it comes to what's happening in retail. I'm not going to dwell on this too much at all, to be honest, but we know the high street isn't dead, but there are some significant areas that need some addressing. I think firstly, retail has got a right size. Depending on who you ask, there's around 20 or 40% too much retail stock. That's way too much. And I think that really we need to think about condensing space as much as repurposing as well. And hopefully I'll touch on that a little later. Retailers and their stores really have to reposition themselves now if they haven't done already. You need to create proper destinations, proper stores that work, and also create, multi-channel environments as well. Most retailers are getting there, but some certainly aren't. And certainly I think that, stakeholders are going to be critical in this reanimation that we're going to see in places. And that goes beyond the retail unit in question, for example, but, thinking about the wider real estate ecosystem as well. And I know that Tom may or may not talk about his Savills research and a nod to what he refers to as retail islands, which is really interesting. And I think that one empty shop is one void, but 10 empty shops is a massive regenerative issue. So these are some of the points on the whole that we'll be talking about today, I think. And repurposing that space offers a real practical solution to obsolescence that we're going to see in department stores and shopping centres. So first up, here's something that we've all heard about: CVA's administration's store closures. Hasn't been pretty, but it's happening. It's still going on. The top line here really is that 27 million square foot of space has been gutted out since 2018, with a caveat that those figures are only to the end of Q3. To put this into some sort of context, because I know that numbers don't mean a lot to some people, especially when they're that big. Debenhams' ultimate closure has resulted in around 12.5 million square foot, which is 5 Westfields or 160 football pitches. Department stores are going to be at the sharp end of this consolidation, as are shopping centres as well. And that leads us nicely onto a slide of vacancy rates, which I've got from the LDC. It's not surprised that vacancy has been increasing over the past few years, but I think what's probably more useful is to look at that black line there, which is net closures, and we've actually lost around 8,000 stores since the start of 17. So increasing vacancy obviously means that there are more units coming to market, and property link data shows us that much as well. Again, with the caveat, this is only to the end of Q3. We found that units on the market were up 40% year on year. So, retailers need less space. More's going to come back to the market. And the trouble is that it's getting tougher and tougher to rent these units out. That's because we're now at that impasse where, we've got to that point where retailers can only afford to pay so much for these shops, but yet landlords need a certain income to service their own debts, and that's especially true for shopping centre landlords. As a result of this, rents are down around 16%, at least 28% over the past decade. This is probably going to continue as occupiers are continuing to demand increased flexibility, and things like turnover rents become much more commonplace than they already are. That's obviously having an effect on the number of new occupiers taking space. That line in orange is obviously caveated by COVID, but the previous 2 years have seen a gradual and sustained period of reduced take-up in retail. And again, that's something that we could come to expect going forward as well. And it's the rebalancing of values in the sector that's really wreaking havoc, I think, across the board. And I'm just going to share with you 2 more final slides to get you thinking about where we might be headed. This one is what the rental market looks like right now. So the blue line is the number of retail transactions completed, which has obviously plummeted away in recent years nationally. What I'd like to draw your attention to, though, really is the grey and the orange lines, which represent expiries and lease breaks. So the data tells us that we're expecting a raft of expiries in the future. Now, obviously, the analyst out there amongst you will look at that and say, well, obviously that's obvious. As the blue line shifts across, then you can sell the grey and the orange. But it's because of what's happening in the market that makes it such a critical moment. I think 65% of leases signed since 2015 are going to expire or experience break before 2025. Again, you might think that's quite usual, given that the average retail lease length might be around 10 years or so. But around 30% of those we estimate are over rented. And herein lies the bigger issue. Are retailers now going to re-sign for this space, or are they going to continue to consolidate? And finally, one slide to leave you with from me. We already know that repurposing is happening on the whole, and here's a nice little slide that shows what's been going on since 2014. 1 in 3 have been transitioned, excuse me, to A3 use for food and beverage. That bubble's probably burst, if not probably plateaued by now. So I wouldn't expect to see such a rampant growth in that particular side of things in the future. But more recently, there's been a spike in interest from conversion away from shops into homes. This is pretty controversial, and I'm sure we're probably going to talk about this in more depth later on, especially some concerns about liberalisation of planning as well. Thanks for listening. I am going to do a shameless plug. If you are interested in reading more about this data and what else we offer, then go to that link, or alternatively, I can maybe drop a link around to you all at some point. So thanks for listening. That's all from me. And I think I'm going to hand over to Tom now, who's going to steal my screen.
Yeah, okay. Great, thanks, James. So yeah, as mentioned, I've done a fair bit of research on this myself in the last couple of years, and it is a fascinating area, even if it's spawned from critical oversupply. And the reason I love it is because I see how we have an opportunity, if we're willing and able, to resolve some of the mistakes of overdevelopment of the last half a century. As has been mentioned too, Savills has recently produced a big report on this, and I'm just going to touch on a few of the elements here that are relevant to the way that we need to think about evolving shopping centres and department stores. If you believed everything you read in the last few months, you'd think that retail consumers and shopping places have all changed for good. The pandemic will accelerate the evolution of our cities and will hasten existing trends, but they will not create new trends, so said Norman Foster back in September. And I agree. What we're seeing now is a number of key trends thrown into the spotlight like never before, but these trends have gradually been reducing our need for retail for some time, as has been alluded to already. Have we actually reached a point where nothing will ever be the same? Personally, I don't think so. COVID did cause us to overnight change the way we think about how we live, work and play, but these changes were coming. E-commerce, polarization of convenience over experience, changing consumer behaviors, all things I could spend a long time dwelling on, but we can save that for another time. However, there is one trend that I do want to pick up on today because I think it is relevant to the context of what we're talking about. And perhaps the biggest change will be how we work. Social distancing will ease, but we've learned that it is possible to do our jobs remotely at least some of the time. A new Savills survey recently showed how attitudes to working have changed. Pre-COVID, 80% of workers indicated a preference for working at home one day or less each week. And post-COVID, another survey has looked at 80% may now well be planning to work at home at least 2 days a week. So a significant shift in attitudes. CACI estimate that 25% of retail spend in city centres is for workers. So therefore, even a 20% or even a single day shift in behaviour could alter the need for retail space in city centre locations, and by the same token, increase the need for space where we live. People may seek a better work-life balance, but that isn't the same thing as seeking more home life, as I'm sure we can all associate with. And this is a really interesting proposition, I believe, for more co-working spaces, and more of that later. And it's at this point that I would usually hammer home the stark statistics of where retail voids are getting to, but I won't, other than to say that the figures are pretty scary, and it's about time we did something about it, frankly. So what do we do with this excess space? Do we reposition it? Do we repurpose it? Well, of course, the answer is both. And retail isn't dead. Yes, it comes up all the time, and there is too much of it. Yes, but there isn't the same thing as saying it is redundant or denying it a central role in where and how we spend our money. This is not the death of the high street, but it might be the death of the high street as we know it. The repurposing story is moving beyond just rethinking the need for retail, but actually thinking the need for uses of all space. And the solution is in creating hybrid spaces. It's reimagining the real function of consumer ecosystems, which will often mean not thinking about retail places as retail-only places, recognizing, of course, that it's not one solution that fits all, but most places have something they need. The clever bit being working out what that need is. Mixed use, of course, benefits all uses, interlinking journeys, creating footfall, operating different day parts. They have the potential to make places that are more vibrant, have greater social value, are more resilient, and are more sustainable. So what is sustainable repurposing? Well, essentially, it's making sure that whatever we adapt places to, we're attempting to ensure that they stand the test of time, are future-proof, and provide something that communities actually need. And sustainable repurposing is more than just simply converting retail to traditional offices or residential. So in terms of office employment space, we're seeing increasing interest from co-working offices, maker spaces. We're currently working with some life science developers looking very closely at city centre department stores. Living spaces aren't just about apartments for millennials. If we're serious about creating sustainable communities, we need all kinds of people living together, which requires a rethink in how we build them and how we think about the disparate housing needs of different life stages and affluent groups. Retail, of course, has its place and needs to be right-sized, not replaced, evolved, not eliminated. We need to think of these as consumer hubs that are more than just shopping, but instead meet other social and civic needs. And this includes health and education. And further education and medical providers increasingly seeking consumer hub locations. The NHS are looking at shopping centres for medical practices. Leeds College is looking at a city centre department store. And in Texas, a university has taken the whole upper floor of a failed shopping centre in order to adapt into a campus. Retail and leisure facilities remaining on the ground floor to support the needs of students and the local communities. And we're going to see more of this happen now in the UK. So let's have a very quick look at a few examples in the UK. Repurposing has the opportunity to take failed retail space and adapt it to fill another local need. Stockport has struggled with high retail vacancy for decades, largely on the back of overdevelopment of out-of-town retail. And yet the town has some great fundamentals and has seen a surge of investment in and around the town centre in recent years. In 2018, M&S closed its store as part of its national overhaul, and this had the potential to leave 80,000 square feet blight on the high street, and the current occupational market would see little demand for this unit, a unit of this size. Yet, while Stockport town centre is oversupplied for retail, it is undersupplied for offices. So Glenbrook seized the opportunity to access a significant floor space at the heart of the town centre and repurpose it into a workspace environment. The new scheme stock is anticipated to increase footfall, further diversifying the town centre offer. Instead of standing empty, shoppers will see the historic building remain an important part of the community. We can't underestimate the importance of community and social value, which is key to the success of retail places, especially in markets that have limited residential and office demand. These four examples take food hall concepts, which has too often been associated with affluent and tourist locations, but can be beneficial to driving footfall in all sorts of weird and wonderful locations. And these four examples are all well out of the southeast. So yes, it can work elsewhere. And the right offer brings with it engagement. Commune in Sheffield is a good example to pick on as a repositioning of marginalised retail space. The former cooperative department store stood empty for 10 years and the streets around it were also in decline. North Point Developments put a food hall on the ground floor, co-working space above, and the scheme has been instrumental to driving footfall in the area and the subsequent revival of adjacent units that are now seeing a surge of occupational demand and regeneration opportunities. And finally, Hatch Manchester, which is not exactly the repurposing of a retail pitch, I accept, but it is adjacent to a retail pitch with high voids and poor quality. And there's a lot to like about it. It's got a great street food offer. It's cleverly used the existing urban fabric of the flyover to create a covered public realm. The blend of F&B with the incubator retail and office space containers, not to mention a great cup of coffee. Never underestimate the importance of a great cup of coffee. And God, how I missed that. I want to get back to town centres for that particular nugget. But this is a great example of how there is still demand for retail development in the shadow of declining retail spaces, and how it is important to create a unique offer that appeals to consumers and builds community. It is also an example of how awkward spaces can be adapted to create something cool, varied, and relevant. And there is a serious question here of why so many of these types of schemes seem to be popping up outside of existing buildings when there are countless opportunities within them. Back at the beginning, I asked whether we had actually reached a point where within retail where nothing would be the same. And there is no doubt that we're in for some significant changes to our working, living, social and shopping behaviours over the next decade. Disruption can be painful, but it can also be positive. We can choose to do nothing, or we can embrace the opportunity for change. The repurposing journey starts with retail, but it ends with better, more resilient and sustainable town centres and consumer hubs. And that, despite all the doom and gloom, is an exciting proposition. Thank you. And I will hand over to Matt.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so hopefully everyone will be able to see my screen in front of you. So I'm going to spend the few minutes that I have just give you a really quick overview of our philosophy at Legal & General for managing retail in the future and how that translates into our approach, obviously, particularly for department stores and shopping centres. Before we get into the weeds of it, I guess let's start with the problem. And Tom and James obviously covered this off already, but I think the reality that we're facing here is that a lot of shopping centres have got a relevance issue. It's not a COVID issue. You know, the challenges have been apparent for a long time, but just to give you a couple of stats, you know, footfall has been down close to 10% over the 3 years leading up to 2020 in shopping centres. And we've also seen vacancy rise above 15% in a lot of shopping centres as well. So that tells us two really important things. Firstly, centres are becoming less relevant to both consumers, but they're also becoming less relevant to occupiers as well. So before we even start thinking about repurposing, we really need to think quite deeply about how we can make our retail places relevant to both of those two groups. So at Legal & General, ultimately our kind of philosophy around how we make retail relevant again really boils down to the strapline on the screen in front of you, which is all about making incredible places for people. And at the heart of this is the need for us as owners and all retail property owners really to move from this, you know, historically passive role of leasing shops, collecting rent and cleaning spaces to a much more active role, which revolves around providing the right content at the right time in the right location. And again, I think we can't even start rethinking you know, department stores and what we do in shopping centres if as owners we don't acknowledge that our role and our responsibilities have evolved. So how do we go about approaching repurposing? So I guess from our perspective, there's three kind of key themes that we focus on. Firstly, it's about curation. It comes back to the point that I've mentioned before about providing the right content in the right location that is really relevant to our target audience, our target consumer. In order to facilitate that, it's really important that we provide the right product for the occupiers that we want to partner with that are future fit. And that's why we've launched a new commercial leasing framework, what we're calling flexible partnership model, which includes everything from really short-term flexi leases, all built around short-term leasing and performance-linked leasing, and also our operational model, which is about providing turnover-based leasing, which again is giving ultimately both occupiers and ourselves greater flexibility and optionality in terms of how we manage our space. I would also, I guess at this point when we're talking about curation, completely echo what Tom's already said around social value, and I think there's a really great opportunity for more community involvement in terms of how we curate our spaces to make them relevant for local communities. The second element that we really focus on in terms of repurposing and our strategy more generally is about activation. Typically public spaces, particularly in shopping centres, are very clean. They're very bare in terms of places for people to sit and communicate, and also a bit stale, let's face it. So, you know, you've just seen some great examples of bringing public spaces to life through big, bold colours, improved public realm, and also events programs that really create great experiences and also environments where people want to spend their free time. And again, it comes back to that relevance point of creating places that people want to spend time in and yeah, want to engage with. The final point, which is, I guess, fundamental to the repurposing argument, is all about diversification. The reality is, and we've seen it already, we've got too many shops in the UK, so it's obviously absolutely vital that even within, you know, relevant retail places, we bring in other uses and also bring in other revenue streams into our schemes, and that can be anything from health, it can be workspace, it can be learning. So that's great from a consumer perspective because it brings in different reasons to visit the scheme, but also great, I think, and really important increasingly going forwards from an investment standpoint, because we think going forwards, those shopping centres, maybe we shouldn't even be calling them shopping centres anymore, that can evidence a resilient and also diversified cash flow away from traditional bricks and mortars retailers, will be far better placed in the future. I guess it's all well and good, me kind of talking the talk about our vision and our strategy, but I guess now's probably the point to just give a couple of examples of where we're trying to put repurposing and our strategy into action. So one example that we've got here is an example of repurposing a department store. So Debenhams, very topical, on Princes Street in Edinburgh. We've submitted an application for planning to redevelop this Debenhams into an upper upscale hotel. So that would involve a 208-bed hotel and 5 complimentary eating and drinking experiences. So everything from a destination neighbourhood restaurant to an experiential rooftop bar. That's a picture on the right-hand side with that incredible view of the castle, but also a cafe and wine bar and an urban spa. And that's something that we would own and operate going forwards. And really, from our perspective, that is a prime example of the importance of curation, the right format, the right content for the right location. So in this instance, this is more of a more complete repurposing, redevelopment of a department store into a hotel, which for us makes complete sense given Edinburgh is prime pitch in Edinburgh, which is the second largest tourist destination in the UK. Moving on, and I guess I won't touch on this point in too much depth, that this is just an example around public realm. You've seen some great examples already, but again, it's just about bringing a lot more colour into these environments, really transforming that public space and creating these environments where people can socialise, they can play, they can hang out, they can date, whatever it might be. And I think the public realm is a really important fabric to stitch together the environments. And too often as owners, we think about the shops and the spaces, and we don't really think about the places in between the shops that we're leasing out. So we think it's a really big focus area, particularly in shopping centres going forwards. Just moving on, and I guess this is another element of a, I guess part of a repurposing that we're working on a shopping centre. So this is Kingland High Street in Poole. Not the most inspiring picture if we look at what it looked like last year. So it's a small high street parade adjacent to the Dolphin Shopping Centre in Poole, which sits within our management and our ownership. So historically it's been quite quiet. It's pretty tired. It's pretty unloved. But actually, what we're moving towards is a far more aspirational, vibrant street, which is going to be occupied by 10 new start-up local businesses, which are really going to bring some diversity to the local area. And it's all about creating a place and a hub where people can eat, drink, shop. They can sample the best brands from across Dorset, and it's got everything there from a non-profit art gallery to a furniture upcycling shop to a fishmonger to a sustainable perfume shop. And it's all being sourced. All the relationships have come from a local team that really understands the local business community there. I guess one of the other really distinctive points about this initiative that we're launching here is that actually these units are rent and rates free for the first 2 years. So yeah, believe it or not, we're giving away free shops, but we think that's really important, and we're willing to invest in this project, in this vision, because we really believe in it, and we see this as a long-term play for ultimately 2 reasons. Firstly, helping to drive engagement with the scheme within the local community and really start to attract particularly the local kind of creative community, which has never really engaged with the Dolphin Shopping Centre in the past. And this is a really great opportunity for us to reframe the positioning of the centre going forwards. The second point, which is really important about this initiative, is the reason why it's a 2-year project for with rent free and rates free, is that it gives these brands, and these are local businesses taking their first shop in most instances, gives them the time and space to develop their businesses. And we see it's really crucial in the future to have this type of incubation space, which is a launch pad for new exciting brands that ultimately we hope will become long-term occupiers. And it's all about trying to create an ecosystem within our shopping centre, within our local ownership, for occupiers of all shapes and sizes, whether they be retailers, non-retailers, local brands, national brands. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of the brands that we're working with here have great social and environmental credentials, because it really fits with our broader legal and general policy around inclusive capitalism, but also we see it as a really important point of helping to engage the local community and get some kind of local community engagement and taking ownership of their local environments and local high streets. So just a few examples from the ownership side from me, and that's everything from me. And I think I'll pass over to Patrick, who is going to boot me off the screen now.
Sorry, just working it out. Okay, so okay, hi there everyone. So I'm Patrick from Applied Studio, architects and interior designers. This is some of our work, and I guess my perspective on this is coming from, I guess, obviously a design perspective, but the people who would be creating some of these new spaces to go into the repurposed spaces like shopping centers. Yeah, so a different perspective on that. This, just to start with, was just an example in Birmingham. We're looking at a few projects there within this old W.H. Smith, which takes up a huge amount of the city centre. It's a massive space, and an example of a project that we're putting in there in terms of repurposing these spaces. But really, for me, this was, obviously we all hear all these statistics and all the numbers and everything, but for me, this was really a kind of a first-hand experience, just to see the actual reality of these empty spaces and these huge empty spaces in these prime positions, seemingly prime positions in major city centres, and just something of the past. So yeah, this was a kind of opulent W.H. Smith, thousands and thousands of square feet, now completely empty and looking to repurpose itself. This is just, again, looking at this from a design perspective, and I guess we all know, and what we've touched on already within this webinar has been, I guess, the move away from convenience of these shopping centers towards more of an experience for the people that are visiting. And that really is our challenge as designers, to design spaces where the experience that they provide to people visiting overcomes the convenience of what they can now do online, where they wouldn't have to leave their house. So obviously online shopping and everything, but also with deliveries and food and everything, that you have the convenience of everything pretty much of what you used to get in these spaces. So this is an example, and this is actually a fast food restaurant that we're working on. And for me, it's important because it just shows the shift in the priorities of the clients that we're working with now, and little things that we're doing now that kind of show the direction in terms of design, and the importance that clients are placing on customer experience, and that customer experience being the main driver of everything that we do, because at the end of the day, that's what we have to rely on, and it's got to be good enough to beat the convenience of having all this stuff at home. So banquette seats that are kind of subtly broken up with columns to divide up the space. So rather than sitting on a long kind of straight run of seats, you've got a slightly more intimate dining experience, and just subtle changes to I guess achieve marginal gains in the improvement of the customer experience. Same with the booths. Little kind of framework between them to increase the sense of enclosure, to improve the customer experience. This is a window counter, and rather than just having one big long run of counter, kind of characterless and almost canteen style, breaking that up again with little columns to, so although you're at the counter and having a similar experience, you've still got that kind of sense of intimacy and an improved dining experience, and also being able to cater to the single dining diner experience, something that's kind of overlooked. But the point of this really is just to show the shift now in the work that we do as designers and our clients that we work with, and really how customer experience now is the priority of everything that we do, and it has to be, in order that these physical spaces remain relevant in this online age. So again, some of the uses that we've already touched on for some of these areas, and the rise of I guess we would call competitive socializing, and the different spaces that they have brought to some of these areas, so darts and ping pong, with mini golf, completely new spaces, completely new almost typologies that are now taking over these areas with real exciting opportunities there. And again, things that we've touched on before, but these kind of market halls with multiple different operators within them, and the same applies for some larger restaurants too. So these are two larger spaces, which previously potentially could have been just restaurant spaces, and that was all that they would offer. But again, focusing on the customer experience and looking to really lift that, they now offer a multiple different customer experiences. So within this restaurant, you can work there. There's hot desks. There's also unique things like gin tasting and bakeries and pizza ovens and things like that. So really, some of these spaces looking to tap into, wherever they can, the experience of the customer and enhance that as much as possible, again, to be able to compete with the convenience of online. This is a good current example, I think, which is Coal Drop Yard here in London in King's Cross. And I think really my point here, and I think, again, it's been made in the previous presentations, was just about that some of these spaces, I mean, I think what tends to happen is a relatively narrow view that these spaces have to be repurposed by retail or by food and beverage units. But what is really important, and what is lacking from some of these schemes, is the kind of sense of place and community within these areas, that some of these uses, as you see here, can really add. So it's repurposing these spaces is not just about providing the normal typologies of what used to be there before. It's about bringing in some of this experience that I've been talking to, but also about maintaining that sense of community and giving the local community a real sense of place and ownership over the physical space of their city centres. And I think, for me, the combination of all those elements really shows that there is a shift, of course, in the uses of these spaces, but as Tom was saying, the future really is positive, and there are definite uses out there that could repurpose all this empty space. That's it from me.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you. I mean, what you all said was really, really fascinating. There was so much content in there. It's hard to know sort of where to start. Also, we've had quite a lot of questions in the chat in the meantime too. So I'm just going to sort of take a look at some of those as well. One of the questions has been, I guess I can put this as a general question. It's been around rents. First of all, somebody was asking, what's the differential between retail and F&B rents? Because apparently it's very big, but he'd like to know what it is exactly. And the question surrounding rents in general is, I suppose, that what do you think? I guess this would be a question for any of you really. What do you think rents have got to rebase to in the retail sector to make them attractive to and also affordable to retailers? So it's all this general question about rents and affordability, really. I don't know if, who would like to take that. perhaps James, since you're the one that introduced, you know, the differential between the F&B and the retail rents.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question,
Yeah.
and to be brutally honest, it's not something I've recently looked into in much depth. I know anecdotally that, you know, that's what a lot of people are saying, and I think that the rebalancing of where we are in terms of valuations is going to be, if not critical already, it's going to become the biggest the biggest point where, you know, retailers are now going to turn around and say, we aren't going to pay that rent because firstly we can't afford it and we don't want to pay that. But then, you know, obviously shopping centre owners and landlords are going to have to recuperate money somehow. So that is the big quandary. I think that in the future, I know I said that we would be looking at a higher amount of turnover rents. That's going to continue. I'm sure everyone will agree. I think that perhaps a rebalancing is needed on the types of spaces. Depending instead of a basic per square foot per annum basis of remuneration, we begin to look at the value that a operator brings to a destination and try and reframe it that way. But it's very complicated. Like I said, and it's not something that I can, you know, I don't have experience of rental negotiation, so I wouldn't like to put too fine a point on it.
Okay, perfect, thank you. I'd like to move on and touch on the next question, really. Once again, I want to tie in a few points to this, because I want to pick up on something you mentioned, James, in your presentation. You said the liberalisation of the planning system is controversial. And I think you've got particular reference to Resi, because in one of your charts, you showed that apart from F&B, which is a third of all retail repurposing stroke conversions was F&B, the next biggest chunk was residential. And with this new sort of permitted development rights that the government's proposing at the moment, the idea is that they want to make it easier to convert to Resi, don't they? But however, and this ties into one of the audience's questions, you know, what would be the right balance, and how do you know the right balance between Resi and other uses? And doesn't it just mean that because the planning system is liberalising, making it easier to convert to Resi, that therefore other uses might lose out, like convenience or something that's lower value, you know, than Resi? So, you know, just a question around the right balance and, you know, and why this planning is so controversial as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's a really good question. And when you say it like that, it makes sense to encourage change of uses away from retail to others. I think that one of the issues inherent with the, you know, if you like, complete liberalisation of planning is that it may well hand the initiative of regeneration of places to perhaps the wrong people at the wrong time. And you know, I remember when I was putting these slides together, and a quote from Jurassic Park came to mind, which is really random. It's the quote by Ian Malcolm, and it's something along the lines of, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. You know, that every high street is different, and every town centre is different, every shopping centre is different, and they all serve a different, you know, part of the populace or society that they're within. And the issue we've got is that there are too many identical copy and paste retail offerings at the moment. You know, I know that a number of the panelists touched on social value and cultural capital. Those are really important. So if you're looking to sustain and contribute to a healthy localized economy, then you need to get it right. And also, you know, I don't know if many people have actually seen a lot of the examples of retail to Resi that are beginning to pop up. And, you know, I don't particularly mean, and the data does exclude things like, you know, shop unit, then houses on top. I mean high street, I mean butcher, shop, bookies, you know, so like that. I don't think it's right that we try and shoehorn accommodation into these places. I don't think it works at ground level. I don't think it's very conducive to a healthy high street or a shopping centre, for example. And finally, I think that I kind of view the high street as like a set of piano keys, if you like. Voids are bad, but they're often random and where they crop up. If you try and plug each gap, at different times, then other gaps will appear, and you're often just like plugging different holes. It's like whack-a-mole. In an ideal world, and this is what I meant about condensing space. If you in your world, you just chop off the ends and then squeeze everything together, have all of the good retail that's left, and then you would have room to build out as much res as you like. So my fear with what's happening with planning is that it's only going to exacerbate a problem where we're going to be left with pretty run-down high streets and shopping centres in the future. But that's just my take on it. I mean, the rest of the panel, I feel very different.
Yeah, exactly. Matt, I know that your organisation is involved in the build-to-rent sector. Now, I'm just going to tie this with something you've said as well, because you've mentioned your strategy of diversifying away from retail to resilient, what we call alternative sectors with long income, etc. But that seems to go against the resi argument, which is, the shorter leases, etc., and that sort of thing. So what's your view on the right kind of strategy in terms of alternatives, resi versus other alternatives, student housing or healthcare, etc.? How does that fit in with your overall strategy?
Yeah, good question. And I guess it's important not to try and think too much in terms of almost investment outcomes when we're actually scoping out what is the right solution for an individual location. And I think that's the mistake that we've made before in the past with the retail sector. The session with long leases, upward only rent reviews has kind of got us in this situation to start off with. So I think it needs to be less about trying to think about investment outcomes, more thinking about the right the right mix of uses for that location. And I think shopping centres are a prime example of where resi doesn't really typically fit unless you're doing a knockdown rebuild type of job. So so I think it's the right use for the right location. We're positive a lot about a lot of different alternative sectors, but again it's feeding it in. I gave the example earlier of the hotel in Edinburgh that we're looking to repurpose. Works for Edinburgh, doesn't work elsewhere. It doesn't work in Poole, for example. So for us, it's the right use and the right location. I think workspace has got a really big role to play going forwards in a lot of these environments. But the key is how you get these alternative uses to integrate with the town centre, with the wider shopping centre. And I think there's this real danger, kind of touched on the point that James has already made, where you end up with, I guess, these silos within your shopping centre environments where you've got a silo managed workspace, which adds nothing to the overall experience of visiting a shopping centre. And I think trying to integrate these uses properly so that it adds to the overall experience, it adds to the rhythm of this and vibrancy of the centre is really key. So I think let's not go from one size fits all approach to another one. Let's
exactly.
The other thing I think to add to that is the reason that residential is coming out as such a high proportion of current repurposing is because we are really the tip of the iceberg at the moment. Very few genuine repurposing projects have been done, and although we talk a lot about it, it is happening now. And the reason so many of the schemes that have already happened do have a residential angle is purely one of viability. And going back to the previous question about rents and where they need to be, rents need to be lowered. By the way, it's very easy for me to say this when I don't have billions of pounds invested, but rents need to be lowered in order to make it more affordable for the remaining retail, but actually also to make it more viable to change to alternative uses. Because if you've got a business model that you're still assuming a certain rental income for the retail, it completely is out of kilter with the ability to put in workspace or offices. So a wholesale change to the way that we think about rental income is really key. And actually, some of these alternative sectors, as has been pointed out, they pay long rent. They'll sign for 30 years, and that's completely unheard of in retail now. So if you're if you're in for the long game, some of these alternative sectors are quite an attractive proposition. But I just feel that, and I'm a massive proponent for residential in town centres, as my colleagues know, but we're going to see a blend, and that blend of offer, as has been said already, is going to have to be very, very location specific.
Yeah, Tom, just adding to that, I wonder if you could bring in, because I was really fascinated by your comments, and I've also read your article on demand for co-working, etc., in town centres and flexible workspaces. So, you know, how does that fit in with this overall thing? I think you've kind of already mentioned, I guess, that there's no one size fits all, but I mean, I guess what's happening is with more people sort of working from home and then looking for a third space that's not in the city centre, then that's driving that demand for sort of local neighbourhood sort of co-working. Is that how you see it? And how
I think there's massive
going forward?
Yeah, I think there's massive demand. I mean, if we think about, I mean, the kind of whole WeWork model became a bit of a dirty word sort of 12 to 18 months ago. And I think that's largely down to the fact that they were very much expanding into traditional city centre office locations, rather than necessarily thinking about a smaller model that would work in every town. Now, just a few stats. So co-working space can operate from 5,000 square feet units. So that's perfect for a lot of empty high street units. We've currently got 23 million square feet of voids in units of that category. And 150 towns have at least 50,000 square feet of units of that size. So there is a huge the potential in terms of the availability of space for that particular use. So the opportunity is there. And as I alluded to before, I think the examples that we've got, the likes of Commune and Stock, just show that people do want to be in consumer hubs, but perhaps they don't want the long commutes all of the time. So yeah, I'm very, very positive about that particular piece. I mean, the main challenge, of course, with co-working is you need somebody to curate the space. Yes,
absolutely. I just want to bring in Patrick here, because I'm conscious that we sort of need to involve you in the discussion as well. There's two things that come to mind. One of James's charts was showing this big rise in conversions to F&B and stuff. And obviously, Patrick, you're still advocating retail conversions to potentially, well, let's say, perhaps repositioning to more suitable retail, but also leisure in terms of experience, you know, whether it's bowling or whatever it is. So how do you see that fitting in with a sort of high street strategy? I mean, do you still think F&B has a future, or is it that before we just had the wrong sort of F&B? It was too mass market, it was not personalized, and it really needs a different take on it to personalize it and to offer more of an experience, Patrick?
Yeah, I think there's definitely still a space for F&B, and my personal opinion is that I think there always will be. I think what me personally, I'm currently seeing in the market now is, and potentially accelerated by COVID, is just an acceleration of everything, which is kind of squeezing everybody, so that the people that are underperforming are kind of dying out quicker, I think, and but the guys that are good and good anyway are surviving, and I think within that there's real opportunity for new operators to come in who are doing things better, and are, as I said, focused on that customer experience, and I think that. Well, me personally, what I'm seeing is that they're kind of bland, smart casual kind of middle of the market operators in terms of F&B has gone away somewhat, and that's being replaced by smaller, quicker, faster, better, independent F&B people. And within this current market, I think there's real opportunities with that, with reduced rents and all this kind of stuff for entrepreneurs and new and different operators to come into that.
Yeah. I'm conscious that we're kind of running out of time, and quite frankly, I could go on for probably another hour here. But so I just want to ask a question posed by Matthew Hopkinson. What's the panel's view on demolishing shopping centres and creating parks in city town centres, you know, like Stockton and Nottingham? And what's your view on economic value versus the social value friction, which should win? I mean, that's a hugely complicated but fascinating discussion, isn't it? I don't know if you want to try and take that, Tom. And if you don't mind, if we could just go over by a few minutes, so we could end by about 2:05. If everybody's happy with that, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and a fascinating one, and one I feel very close to. But has anybody actually nailed the relationship between financial value and social value yet? I'm not convinced that they necessarily have, but I think people recognise how important it is. We know that it reduces the amount of space, so that's good because it supports what retail is left. It supports the fact that people want amenity and places to socialise, so it makes places more vibrant, so it's good for that. I think it helps developers with their ESG credentials, which are important for their own investment, and that's good for that. So I really like it. The real challenge that no one's quite got their head around yet, although I'm sure they're trying, is if you demolish, I don't know, 100,000 square foot and put a nice wildlife space in, how do you balance the values? And that is, I think, yeah, bit of head scratching around that one, but great question, Matthew.
Yeah, I think Tom's pretty much hit the nail on the head there with covering everything. It is a brilliant idea, and I do expect that we will see more of these sorts of designs from architects and planners coming through, because at the moment that, you know, some towns are certainly oversupplied by lots and lots of retail, and some of it may be a couple of units, some of it might be, you know, what you might define as a secondary shopping centre that really doesn't serve a purpose anymore. Now, we've spoken about, you know, some of the alternative uses for those spaces. Residential is the one that's getting the most traction because it makes the most money and it's probably the most needed at the moment. So there's always going to be a trade-off, as with everything at the moment, between homes and space. I would like to, I'd like to see somebody, you know, run with one, and it's easy for me to say because I'm not a landlord or an investor, but just see how it goes. And then, because Tom's right, you know, we haven't seen any examples of it being done properly, and it's almost impossible to see what the economic benefit of that is yet. I mean, you can have a guess about different, different benefits that these sorts of things will bring, but I don't think everyone would like them. It's just a case of if they're viable or not.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think definitely kudos to Stockton for doing that, having such a clear vision, and putting their money where their mouth is, frankly, to deliver on it. So big kudos to them. And I guess it comes back to the point earlier around, relevance. There is some retail that's not relevant, and in that instance, I think the thing to stress is you do need, definitely public sector involvement, I think, on those types of, big scale, long-term projects to really deliver that. But yeah, I think kudos to them, that they've really invested in their town centre. They've got a really clear vision around what they want to do with the spaces. And I think, Tom mentioned it before, but I think, the retail that is left within that town centre will benefit from the kind of more condensed hub that they've got, and the more vibrant public realm as a result. So, yeah, won't work everywhere, but I think credit to them for delivering it in a town which has got too much retail space.
And the one thing to add to that, is that there is evidence that resi values are higher where there is good amenity.
Right, just very conscious of time now. So unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap up soon. But I just wondered if you could all just briefly give some sort of final comments, or is there anything that you would like property researchers to look at in terms of further research on repurposing shopping centres and department stores, or would you just like to sort of add another comment that we haven't discussed? Can I start with you, Tom?
So we're not really to cover the fact that retail investment has been very siloed in terms of the fact that you have your retail asset, your office asset, your and your residential asset or whatever it is. And of course, that's now changing. But in property research, we haven't really started to adapt in that way ourselves. I think we're still very siloed in our approach. So I would like to see a more blended approach to the way that we undertake our property research, to think about the synergy of uses. It's brought up before, not seeing our assets as islands, working out the relationship they have with other adjacent uses, synergies that complement rather than compete. And it's really, and this is the point that we just raised on the last question, is that we need to understand how one use impacts on the values of another use.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tom. I really couldn't. James, do you have any comments to add to what Tom said?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, actually. I think I'd be most inclined, perhaps myself, to look at case studies for where repurposing has and hasn't worked in different types of towns, maybe. Whether that be things like market towns, uni towns, ex-industrial towns, and so on. And I know that we Tom kind of mentioned that we are kind of trapped in this vortex of what we define as real estate values, rents, and yields. But we're getting looking at what we mentioned, the socioeconomic stuff, and how people live in these spaces and what they want. So I think, for me, towns-based analysis that's specific, and also think data relating to regeneration and probably disinvestment is going to be important, especially if we ever get around to leveling up as well, once we get out of this crisis, whatever leveling up actually means. So there's lots to be done, but I think it's much more at micro level.
Right. Matt, can I come to you? Do you have a couple of comments to make, sort of closing remarks?
Yeah, I mean, definitely would echo what Tom mentioned around the kind of valuation piece and mixed use hubs. I think that's definitely an area where everyone should be doing a lot of thinking about. And I think the reality is we've got loads of good ideas that have been mentioned here, loads of great initiatives that are kind of going on. I do feel like we're at an inflection point where actually we're starting to see some repurposing actually happen, which is great. And I think it's really key that we share basically the successes, the failures, and look at probably slightly different non-traditional property metrics in terms of how we define those successes and failures, because some of the things we do, you're not necessarily going to measure the impacts in terms of a rent, but actually, what's the impact on footfall, what's the impact on engagement of these different initiatives, and really start to build the case for why it's important and essential to do.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Finally, Patrick, do you have any sort of final remarks to make?
Well, just that I think obviously in context with the COVID pandemic, I think one thing that's all really made clear to everyone is the kind of importance of community and those aspects of it, and how you look at the current high streets and shopping centres, and how potentially there is some of that lacking there, that sense of place and community in the existing way it's designed. And potentially this is a real opportunity, potentially backed up by the shift in thinking that COVID has maybe promoted, a real opportunity to improve the kind of town centres with community at the heart of it.
Absolutely. I think, it represents a really, really exciting opportunity. So apologies everybody for running over, but I personally found that absolutely fascinating. So I'd really like to thank all of our speakers and panelists. Thank you very, very much for your time today. And I'd also really like to thank, our audience too. So thank you very, very much for attending, all of you. Thank you. Bye.
Yes,